So Carlos Brathwaite, West Indies cricketer, World Cup winner, currently commentator in the ICC World Cup. Thank you very much for being on the Better Than Peter podcast.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Let's pull it back a little bit. Talk to me a little bit when you were a kid. I assume that you would have played a variety of sports as most youngsters do, but when did young Carlos really take up cricket, or how did you figure out that this is something you want to get into?
Cricket was in the blood, to be honest. My dad claims that I used to drag him after work at 3 years old to drive a cricket ball. And he claims I could play cover drive better at 3 than I can now.
Hang on. When you say he claims, are you disputing the claim, or?
I'm not known for my cover drive, so he might just be right. I probably could have played a cover drive better at 3 than I can now at 35. But yeah, that's where it started. My dad is an avid cricket fan and was a cricketer at that time. Played club cricket, never made it to the big leagues as such, but has a real passion for the game. So I would say he's my first coach and longest coach, because he still gives me coaching tips. He still gives me telling offs. And he's probably the hardest coach I've had, because he has prepared me for criticism. There's a lot of criticism coming from his side. But yeah, that was the beginning of cricket for me. My cousin
what age
Jonathan
group?
Carter.
Sorry, what age group are we talking about now?
So yeah, as I said, from 3 years old, so I would have been going to cricket with my dad from I said 3 or so. So all the guys at the cricket club knew me. They'd throw balls to me when cricket was going on, that type of thing. And then I played all the age groups. So I started on the 11s at I think 5 or 6. I got hit from one of the older boys and gave up for a year. Came back the next year and played. So yeah, from the time I knew myself, I was.
Were you better than the kids in your age group?
Not. I wouldn't say I was a prodigy or anything. So at 6 years old, I was just another kid, younger than everyone else, so a lot more frail. And I could hold my own, but I wouldn't say I was one of those guys that at 6 years old, you knew he'd play for West Indies, like he had the world at his feet type of thing.
When did you kind of feel, or when did the coaches or your fellow players feel that, okay, you're progressing, or you're leapfrogging your fellow age group players? When would that be?
I'd be honest, I don't think I ever leapfrogged. I don't think I was ever the best in my group at any age group. So I played 1 year of under 15 cricket, so I was just part of the oldest. I played 1 year under 19, again, just part of the oldest, and it's probably my time then. So I don't think I was ever head and shoulders above any of my peers. I was always good enough to play the role that I had, and that role changed. I started as an off spinner, turned into a batsman on the 11s. On the 13s, then I was a full on top order bat. On the 19, I was opening and batting at 3. And then started to bowl a little bit of medium pace back in on the 19. And then now probably bowling has taken over batting. So I only developed into a genuine all-rounder coming into senior cricket. But yeah, at no point in time did I think, I'm the main man, I'm the go-to guy. I was always just party pat.
Okay, so when did the call up to the West Indies? What was the lead up to the call up to the West Indies? Did you play West Indies A? Did you have a bumper season where you just topped the charts, or were there a spate of injuries? Like, for example, during COVID, there players upon players went down. So obviously you played for the Windies much before. What was the circumstances leading to your debut? Because you must have been a good player to get picked.
So I played on the 19, as I mentioned. I played for Barbados. I had a really bad injury after I made my debut, and then I went to the High Performance Center, second cohort, and I captained that cohort as well, and we did tours and played games. So I think I was always on a pathway to West Indies. But then what earned me the call up which actually was before HPC, was a bumper season, as you mentioned, when the team was away to the 2011 World Cup. We had our first class season. I didn't make the Barbados team, but it was at university, so it was eligible for combined campuses and colleges, or CCC as we call it in the Caribbean. And Floyd Reefer essentially handpicked me to come and represent CCC. Didn't play the first 2 games, I think. Third game, got a knock on my door from one of my friends who in the team to say his back is stiff. He had back problems and he doesn't think he'll play tomorrow against Trinidad. And I'd be working hard. I felt as though I was ready, and made my debut said game in Trinidad. First innings was okay, get your first class wicket. Then you got.
Do you know who was your first class wicket?
Can't remember, you know. But I remember getting 7 for in the second innings.
That's not a bad debut now.
That is not a bad debut. So I made 60.
And this is, sorry, this is bowling off spin, is it?
No, this is bowling seam.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So off spin finished primary school, like by under 13, I was finished with bowling off spin and just a batter. Okay. So debut game, I think 1 for in the first innings. Yeah, like 1 or something like that. I'll get the correct figures. But second innings really came into the game. So I got 61, I think, with the bat. And then we were obviously trying to win the game in the 4th innings with ball in hand. Got 7 for and bowled 25 overs on the trot. Like, Herculean effort.
You played you played 60-20 games, 25 overs, and that's you need to have strong legs to be putting 25 overs in your debut game.
Yeah, no, I was really fit at that time when I was putting a lot of work. And I think my favorite dismissal was to Renako Morton. May you rest in peace. But I just remember just having it on a string. The ball, I think 2 overs of outswingers at him, 2 maidens, and you could just see him trying to get closer and he's itching to get back on ball. And then the 3rd over, 4 dots, again, all outswingers, and then 1 in swinger starting just outside, and he left it alone and it hit middle stump. And yeah, I think that's still the best setup / wicket that I've ever taken.
Well, the fact that you say that you deliberately bowled the in-swinger, because sometimes I hear bowlers say, I just bowled it and I didn't know which way it was going. But the fact that you set him up 4 outswingers and then you bought it in, that must, and the fact that you remember this wicket, so seems like you set him up. Okay, so what happened now? Post, you know, you're a bit of a hero then, debutant, 7 wickets, 2nd innings.
Yeah, I was a bit of a hero because it was still quite low key. It was still only CCC, with all due respect to the institution. CCC is not looked upon as like big boys, so it's almost across the region. It feels like CCC are more so rejects. So the way that CWI has implemented it is a feeder. It should be a feeder into the national teams, but also the national teams get first pick. So you'd often find if someone isn't selected for the national team and they play for CCC, if they have a good breakout season, then the national team picks them the next year because it's the same tournament, same standard, and you've proven that you can perform at it. So more often than not, the CCC team is seen as rejects of sorts. So at that point in time, it wasn't much fanfare. But we had an amazing season and we ended up topping the league charts. We lost in the final, I think, to Jamaica. And I ended up with most wickets as a seamer for the tournament. So I would say that would be my breakout year. That was 2011. And then I made my debut for the West Indies in T20 and 50 over in Bangladesh later that year.
Do you remember how you heard the news of your call-up?
I got a call from Roland Holder. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't think I'd done enough, and I'd only played T20 earlier for Barbados, and I'd done well in red ball. So I was more expecting a red ball call up, A team, something of that sort. But Roland Holder called and I was like, yeah, hello, what's going on, whatever. And it was like, yeah, it is Roland. Just calling to inform your selection for the T20 and 50 over series in Bangladesh. Like, oh, okay. Thanks, I guess. And then that's when obviously the butterflies start to kick in, and something that you've dreamt about all your life may be happening.
Who was the first person you called or talked to?
Always my mom. Anything good or bad, I keep my mom in the loop. And I try to stick to family as best as I can. So if, let's say I'm in the room, my dad, I'll just tell my dad. I wouldn't hide it from him to tell my mom first. But if I pick up the phone to tell someone good news, more often than not, it'd be my mom.
Yeah. And it's interesting you're mentioning that you thought that you'll make your debut, or you were thinking more in the lines of a test player, and the world knows you as this T20 giant. When I was looking at your stats, you did actually play 3 tests, and that obviously came a bit later. But when you were still in your early days of cricket, was the ambition first-class cricket first, and then maybe the one-day format or the T20 format?
Just want to play for West Indies.
Okay.
When I was setting goals, I wanted to captain West Indies, and I wanted to win a World Cup. Now, at that time, obviously, there weren't T20 World Cups. It was just a 50 over World Cup that we'd known. So yeah, so those were my checkpoints: play for Barbados, captain Barbados; play for West Indies, captain West Indies; and win a World Cup.
That's and you achieved all of that. One more question I have on that one is, when you were picked, were you more looked at as a bowling all-rounder?
Yeah, 100% bowling all-rounder.
And then, as the world knows you as the 6 hitting machine, by 2016, would it be fair to say you had developed more? Would it be 50-50 by that time?
I think it fluctuated. I want to look back and say is that I never honed either or enough. So I'd say in test cricket, I would consider myself more of a batting all-rounder. I felt as though technically I was sound enough to play the swinging ball, bat spin, ride out a tough session, but then also transfer the pressure on to the bowling attack. I wasn't as strong with ball in hand in the longer format, more of a conservative type bowler. So I felt I could have been used better in the longer format instead of batting at 8 and 9 and being a first change bowler. I think I could have added more value to the team, batting at 6 or 7, and maybe being the 4th choice seamer. I guess that coincided obviously with Jason Holder being captain, playing a similar role, and having better stats and more impact. So due to, I guess, a couple of those factors, it would have been more difficult for them to make that bold decision. But I guess it's me. So if it were up to me, I would have given myself less to do with ball in hand, and a bigger role with bat in hand, especially how I started my career, well, test career. Whereas with white ball cricket, I felt it was the opposite. I felt as though I had more of a role to play with ball in hand. I rate myself at the death of my skills: Yorkers, slower balls, in the middle, hitting the deck, slower balls, and then just finishing the game with bat in hand.
I want to jump now directly to the 2016 World Cup. And if I have to be honest, the whole world, the cricketing fraternity, anybody who's followed cricket, West Indies has always been dangerous in the T20 format. I want to talk a little bit about, once you were picked for this squad, what was the feeling in the camp? And West Indies is, I guess, always a dark horse or a pre-tournament favorite going into a T20 World Cup, just because I guess you bat all the way down till 9. Players who can chip in, win ball. But I want to specifically talk about that because you ended up winning it.
It was it was interesting. I think I was playing first class cricket at the time. I hadn't been selected for the last T20 series before the World Cup, which was Sri Lanka away. But I think I'd been told I was a reserve. I don't know if it
Okay.
was like publicized, but I think I was told I was a reserve. It was like, all right, yeah, cool, whatever. No one ever gets injured anyway, so a reserve is just a good glorified title. And then funny enough, like a week later, I think Sunil pulled out. So Ashley Nurse got called up, and at the same time, Pollard pulled out with injury, and I got called up. So we both went from just being glorified reserves and playing first class cricket to heading on a plane to be part of a World Cup camp and then eventually a World Cup. So yeah, that was a good feeling and an unexpected one.
So you didn't, I didn't know that. You didn't make the cut for the original West Indies squad. I mean, what an interesting World Cup that would have been. I mean, I still think Pollard could smack Stokes, but did you become playing member right away into the 11 once you got picked? Or was it like, were you picked as the tournament progressed?
Good question. Wasn't as straightforward as getting on the plane and landing with the squad. What we did was we had a camp in the UAE. So I was selected early enough that I could make that camp. So we had a camp in the UAE and we finished with a few games in Sharjah. And at that time, obviously, we were still building the squad. I think we had 3 games and they bowled really, really well in those 3 games. It was against Zimbabwe. So I think if we're being honest, like if someone comes into the squad last minute, they potentially don't walk straight into the 11. But off the strength of my bowling in the nets and my hitting in the nets, along with my performance with ball in hand in the 3 warm-up games, I think when we got to India, it was like he's in the most form. So I did start the tournament. So I played all the games, but it was off the strength of the camp and the warm-up games before.
You knocked India out in the semis, and then you played England in the finals. And again, you were chasing a target, which was a tricky one. But if for the 1 millionth time you can recreate the final over for me, what was going through your mind, just to set it up for anybody who's under a rock and doesn't know? Ben Stokes bowling, 19 runs, you're on strike.
Yeah, I told it a million times, as you mentioned. Yeah, just about watching the ball, reacting. And first one was down the leg side, pick it up. But I guess for me, the thing that I take most from it was the clarity in thought. Batting is a reaction art. You never know what you can get. Obviously, the bowler delivers, the pitch has a part to play. So you're reacting at all times to field setting, to the bowler, to the reaction off the pitch. So I think what I take from that night, and I think stand me in good stead in that over those 4 balls, was just the clarity in thought with all the pressure on in the moment, 90,000 people in the stands, to be able to zone out and just watch the ball and react.
And did you ever hit 4 sixes in an international game or 3 sixes in a row prior to that?
Yeah, in CPL, we lost all our games so far that tournament. This was the last game against Trinidad. They needed to beat us to qualify. And I walked in and hit the first 3 balls that I faced for 6. I think I got 20 off 4 balls and knocked Trinidad out.
Seems like you took some pleasure in that. I can see a smirk. I can see.
Yeah,
All right.
as a Barbadian, there's always a rivalry with Trinidad. And Trinidad has produced so many T20 legends. You're talking to Sunil Narines, Kieran Pollard, Dwayne Bravos, etc. So to get one over any Trinidad team, whether it's be the national team or the franchise, is always a good feeling.
Yeah. So I read, Ian Bishop said that he's slightly embarrassed because everybody remembers him from saying, remember the name Carlos Brathwaite. And he referred to an incident where a couple of days ago, prior to the World Cup, he was asked who are the key players to watch, and everybody was picking Gale. But he said, oh, there's also yourself. And the person didn't know, and he said, remember Carlos Brathwaite. And that's how, when he was speaking, and the emotion came out. And I think as long as World Cup T20s are around, that famous line, and which has been played and which will always be played. So I'd urge you to embrace it. And even if you're going to be asked repeatedly for the next 20 years, you might want to even trademark it, since you're an entrepreneur. Carlos, what else is keeping you busy besides commenting these days?
He did mention entrepreneur. So I think of myself as an entrepreneur. I think that's the first start. And funny enough, the best part of the final story, or one of the best parts for me, is that it spoke to my entrepreneurial spirit as well. So one of my good friends, like a brother to me, spoke about starting to make cricket bats. And at that time, I had my own brand, Trident Sports. And he went away to England to learn under the auspices of Tim Keeley, who'd been known for Newberry and now his own brand. And Tim gave him a cleft to make a bat for me. And lo and behold, 2:30 a.m. a morning, he finished shaping this bat, buffing it, making the edges and everything look nice, and gave me that bat once I was drafted into the World Cup squad. And then fast forward a few months later, that is the bat that I was using to hit Stokes out the park to win the World Cup. So that entrepreneurial spirit spoke volumes. Then we went on to create the first cricket bat workshop in the Caribbean, where we made and repaired bats. So I've always had a mind for the entrepreneurial side of things. I have a passion for business, and I'm embarking on a rather huge project. It's going to solve payments, payment acceptance in my local Barbados and the Caribbean. I'm about to embark on something special, and if I do, I know I'd solve a problem that I've had, and hopefully it could transform fintech and digital finance in the region.
Seems like you're onto something, because Caribbean has 44 million or so people, and it's still a society which is primarily still cash based. So seems like there is a bit of a pain point over there.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, we travel, we experience the US, Europe, and India are actually market leaders when it comes to digital payments and financial technology, or fintech as it's known. But if you look at Barbados as a subsection of the wider Caribbean, and you look at the numbers and the population numbers of 44 million in the Caribbean, you're rivaling Saudi Arabia, Canada, Australia. So it is a big enough market. So the plan is to try to conquer Barbados first, but eventually take the product and the service to the wider Caribbean and have a integrated Caribbean payment gateway and payment acceptance app.
Okay. And when is this about to launch, or can you give us any more detail, or is it still a little bit under wraps?
So still a little bit under wraps, still a lot of regulatory hurdles to get over, because we're so far behind the digital landscape. There's not a framework as such yet that we can just look at, tick off, and know that we abide by all the rules. When it comes to financial services, you're talking about data, you're talking about people's money. So we want to ensure that we are best in class in everything that we do. So still a little bit under wraps. So we have a few timelines that we're trying to work toward. So hopefully close to the end of the year, I may have on a suit and a tie and presenting a passion project that hopefully solves a major problem in Barbados and the wider Caribbean.
Let me coin the term, your title for you: Carlos Brathwaite, World Cup winner, fintech entrepreneur. So,
Love it.
so
Absolutely love it.
after calling the game last night, which West Indies won, by the way, congratulations for them to make the Super 8. Tell me, is commenting something which you've aspired to do, even though you haven't called time on your career, but is it something which you've kind of wanted to do, or this opportunity came about and it was too hard to pass?
It was quite strange how it came about, to be honest. Middle of COVID, in England with my wife and the West Indies, then were the first professional team to actually tour. They came to England. My agent reached out and he was like, the West Indies are coming to town. Obviously, with it being COVID and all the travel restrictions, it's going to be difficult to get a lot of talent in. And he's put my name forward to do some commentary. And at the time, I was just like, a lot of commentators just have bad things to say about current players. And I feel as though a lot of the industry at that time were too forthcoming with like information and education. There were a few that I absolutely loved. Obviously, Ian Bishop, not only for remember the name, but the way he carried himself before games. He made it a point to always be current and up to date. And I always said if I were to go into commentary, I'd want to be similar to Ian Bishop, obviously with my own spin, but it's never something that I really considered. And I was like, you know what, I will take the opportunity. I'll see if I like it. And I did. Got some really good feedback, really good help. BBC were amazing. From the logistics team, the production team, to fellow commentators, just making me feel really welcomed. And I started, and obviously there's a little bit of apprehension. You don't want to make mistakes. You want to call names correctly. I think what really helped me is that these guys on the West Indies team and some of the England team were friends. So all of a sudden, you're sitting, calling and talking about players that you actually know inside out, not only going off dossiers and that type of stuff. So it made it a little easier to transition into the commentary box. And throughout the process of that series, got some really good feedback, got some really good comments on the job that I was doing. That really helped. And then after the series, I was like, you know, I kind of changed my mind on commentary as a post-playing prospect, because no, it's not just rocking up and just chatting. You gotta do a bit of homework. You gotta read dossiers. You need to fit certain things from sponsors, ads. You need to be punchy. As you can tell, I talk too much sometimes.
I was trying to get a word in. I'm trying to get a word in. I'm going to cut you off, Carlos, on that one. So I wanted to start off by cricket, Carlos, but we jumped into commentator, Carlos. So, but let's start. This World Cup has been quite an interesting one. A lot of upsets, a lot of teams, smaller ranked nations upsetting. Carlos, just want to have your quick take on how have you viewed the World Cup?
Enjoyed it. Not enjoyed the pitches, but enjoyed what the pitches have given us. There's allowed the lesser fancy teams and the associate nations to really come to the fore and give the big boys a challenge. So USA running India close, USA beating Pakistan. Yeah, I think it has really leveled the playing field a bit. I think once we get into the Super 8 semi-finals and finals, you want to have better pitches. Still don't want to see 210s and 220s consistently. Happy to see a 180, 185. Give the bowlers a bit of a chance still. But I've enjoyed that unpredictability with matchups and teams. And I've also enjoyed watching a couple of friends, Aaron Jones and Nicholas Curtin, who I would have known made a lot of sacrifice. They were in the Barbados first class team. The natural path is to play for West Indies, play international that way. They chose the other route to use a passport option to go and play for the US in the case of Aaron Jones, play for Canada in the case of Nicholas Curtin. And there would have been a few long years slugging away, going to the UAE, going to Namibia, not as glamorous and glorious as the West Indies tours, but all that sacrifice is now coming to fruition with them being front and center, at least for the first week. of the World Cup. Aaron Jones with a magnificent 94 not out to win the game against Canada, and Nicholas Curtin with a 50 and a 49, showing the world what we know he can do. So for those reasons, it's been good to see from a personal front. From a team standpoint, you always look at India, you always look at Australia, and I think the way India bowled at Pakistan is a good reflection of how you succeed on wickets in the Caribbean, being really disciplined, not trying too much. And then the way Australia batted in Barbados, you always have to be impactful. Got to 200 without anyone scoring 40, just everyone coming in and chipping away, short cameos. So those are kind of the templates that I look forward to seeing in the rest of the tournament.
Very quickly, I know T20 is all the rage, but I want to highlight and talk about a story which basically somebody picked from obscurity, working as a security guard, a West Indian success story, Shamar Joseph. Can you share a little bit about him? I believe he bowled to you, or he bowled to your team in the nets in the CPL.
Yeah, so that's when I first saw him. I heard about him from Nikhil Chandani, who is a Caribbean cricket expert along with USA cricket, young commentator, up and coming, and really does a lot of research and knows his stuff. But saw this guy bowling absolute gas in the nets. And it wasn't the traditional, I'm fast net ball, I want to knock your block off. It was good lines and lengths. It was uncomfortable. He looked lean, he looked powerful. Funny enough, a couple of days later, he got picked for Ghana, Amazon Warriors. They went on to win the tournament. He didn't have the most success with ball in hand, but he showed enough pace, and you can't teach pace the way that he bowls it. He got picked for the South Africa A Tour and did really well, a couple 3-wicket hauls. And then through the opportunity of a couple guys not going to Australia, he was selected. And I think even if the full team had gone, he would have still put himself in the reckoning to be only playing. But yeah, I think his exploits in Australia, he's become an overnight success. But then you think of overnight successes and you just look back at where he came from, the tough decisions he had to make to give cricket another go, keep his body in shape, be a net bowler, be bowling consistently well and not getting carried away. All the things that happened in Australia was a manifestation of the 2 years prior and all the good decisions he made leading up to that. So it was really chuffed for him. I still see him now around the traps, me doing commentary, still trying to have chats with him, still really humble, really level-headed. So much has happened in such a short space of time that it's easy to get carried away as a young player. But he's taken it in stride, he's taken it really well. And I think when you look at West Indies test team and the legacy that fast bowlers have, firing Babylon and whatnot, I think this guy has a very important part to play in the future of West Indies cricket. And I love the way he's handling the fame thus far, because it's only up from here for him.
He signed a big fat deal at the IPL, but from the likes of it, he's got his head on straight. What do you think about the future of Test cricket generally outside the big three? Do you feel that the game will still be relevant or still exist, let's say in 15 years' time, just as a personal opinion?
I'd hope it does. I still love Test cricket as the main format. I think it's a test of mental fortitude, skill, will, fitness. I think Test stats more often than not are still held as the holy grail. There will be a lot of rejigging need to be done to ensure that it still is seen as a pinnacle. It's okay to say it, but if teams only allowed to play a 1 test or 2 test series because of finances, then it'll be quite difficult to prove. So there will be some tough conversations happening within the next 5 years, I suspect. What's the future of the 50-over format? I think the T20 format is here to stay with all the franchise cricket. T10 is coming up as a force to be reckoned with in franchise cricket as well. Never know if we get a T10 World Cup. And Test cricket is the pinnacle. So where does 50-over cricket stand? 50-over World Cup cricket has been the pinnacle of white ball for a while. Has that been now overtaken by T20 World Cups? A lot of questions. A lot of questions need to be answered. But in my opinion, I hope in 15 years' time, Test cricket is still as important and relevant as it is now, and probably even more important and more relevant.
Very well answered. And again, it's, as you said, a lot of interesting and tough conversations across different boards. Carlos, I want to wrap this up, but now away from cricket, what are some of your personal interests? I feel I've seen on your Twitter feed you're a big Man U fan, but what else does Carlos Brathwaite like to do?
Yeah, big Man U fan. More often than not, to the detriment of my mental and emotional health. So yeah, real passion for United. I like business. I like the ability to not only come up with an idea, but then turn that idea into something fully functioning. And I think when I get passionate about something, my ADHD encourages me to go down a rabbit hole. So I would say those would be two of the biggest passions. I love family as well. I have a close-knit circle of friends. We're really family-oriented, married with a daughter, Eden, named after Eden Gardens. So yeah, I see myself as quite boring because when I get locked into something, that's all I do. Happy to stay in my room and just do research and stay on YouTube. When I am out, I'm out. Work hard, play hard type of vibe. But yeah, I'd say United, business, family. Those would be some of my passions.
Where would Carlos, the businessman, be in 2 years' time?
I see myself in 2 years' time at the forefront of Coin, a payment gateway and payment processing app that has revolutionized a few islands and on track to revolutionize Caribbean digital finance, digital payments. And also, I would say I'll even go a little bit further, say 5 years. I want to create a legacy where sports persons can be seen as business persons as well. Break down those barriers that would allow us to get into certain rooms that right now we can't. I think in the US, you look to LeBron James, Rich Paul, and Maverick Carter, how he's brought his group of people into business and seen as a businessman. And you see KD and Kyrie Irving has followed suit, empowering their family members. I want to create that kind of legacy in the Caribbean for cricketers and for sports persons to walk off the field or the court and into the business rooms and conference rooms and be respected for our mind and not just our physical ability.
Why am I not surprised you brought up Kevin Durant? I could see somebody that you aspire to be. So, Carlos Brathwaite, thank you very, very much for being on the podcast. Despite your busy schedule, I genuinely appreciate. And best of luck with all your future endeavors. And thank you for making time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.